When a door finally closes in your 40s or 50s, it doesn't feel like one chapter ending. It feels like the whole book got shorter. The promotion goes to someone younger. The relationship you thought was permanent ends. The career path you were building disappears in a reorg, a crisis, or a quiet loss of relevance. At 25, you could tell yourself, there will be other chances. After 45, that sentence gets harder to believe. You watch opportunities pass and feel a very specific kind of grief, not just for what you lost, but for the versions of yourself that will never exist now. The parent you didn't get to be, the artist you never became, the business you didn't start, the city you never moved to. You don't just feel sad, you feel late. And under that lateness, there is a quieter, more corrosive thought. Maybe I missed my one real shot at a life that felt like mine. The paradox is that regret feels like proof you're out of time, when in reality, it's often the first honest sign that you're finally awake. You look back at the big forks in the road, degrees not taken, moves not made, people you stayed with too long or left too soon, and your brain wants to stamp one brutal label on all of it. Too late. You replay the same scenes like a private documentary. The job you turned down, the risk you didn't take, the talent you left in the corner while you did the sensible thing. It doesn't just hurt, it feels indicting. As if those old decisions were a final exam on your potential, and you are now forced to live with the grade forever. The strange thing is that this midlife review, this if I had it to do over again voice, is not a glitch. It's part of how a psyche matures. Studies following people through midlife show that regret about early choices can actually push people to set new goals and make real mid-course corrections. The problem isn't the regret itself, it's what you do with it. If you treat regret as a museum you visit every night, walking past the same exhibits of what might have been, leaving flowers at the altar of your younger self, your life shrinks around those ghosts. You become an archivist of lost chances instead of an author of new ones. There's another layer to the paradox. Many of the opportunities you're mourning were never as pure or guaranteed as your memory says they were. The career that would have solved everything came with its own politics, trade-offs, and future regrets. The relationship that could have saved you would have also brought a different set of wounds. The city that would have made you come alive still contains traffic, loneliness, grocery shopping, and bad days. Your mind erases all that complexity and turns the path not taken into a perfect alternate universe where you would finally have become yourself. Measured against that fantasy, of course your current life looks flat. At the same time, there's something very real underneath the distortion, a sense of unlived life. Not every missed opportunity was trivial. Some were genuine betrayals of your own values or desires, times you chose safety, fear, or other people's approval over what you knew you wanted. Midlife forces you to face that without the infinite future to hide in. The comfort of one day I'll wears off when you can actually see the edges of your remaining time. That's what makes this phase so psychologically intense. The past is heavy, the future is shorter, and the present can feel like a thin bridge suspended between them. The paradox is that this is also the first time in your life when you have enough data to choose differently. In your 20s, most of your dreams were guesses. Now, your regrets are more precise. You don't just think, I wish I'd been braver. You think, I wish I had spent less time chasing titles and more time building something of my own. Or, I wish I hadn't abandoned that creative work just because it didn't pay yet. Or, I wish I hadn't lived so much of my life in rooms that didn't fit me. Those sentences hurt, but they are also coordinates. Regret, handled properly, is a compass disguised as a wound. The tragedy is not that doors closed. The tragedy is when you keep staring at those doors long after there are other ones you could still open. The shift starts when you stop treating your past as a verdict and start treating it as research. Instead of asking, "How could I have been so stupid?" you begin asking, "Given who I was then and what I knew then, what does this regret reveal about what I actually care about?" That question sounds soft, but it's surgical. Regret usually gathers around the same kinds of wounds. Times you stayed small to be safe, times you copied someone else's script instead of listening to yourself, times you traded aliveness for approval. When you zoom in, your biggest mistakes are rarely random. They cluster around ignored desires and avoided fears. Seeing that pattern clearly is step one, because you can't build new purpose on top of a story where you were only a victim of bad luck. You need to see where you were absent from your own life, not to torture yourself, but to understand where you want to be more present now. The next move is brutal but freeing, accepting that some doors are actually closed, not in a motivational poster way, but in reality. Maybe you're not going to become the 25-year-old prodigy in that field. Maybe you won't have biological children. Maybe you're not going to do 15 years in that career ladder you walked away from. Refusing to accept this keeps you suspended in fantasy, constantly comparing your real life to a version that can no longer exist. Acceptance is not self-hatred. It's a decision to stop trying to time travel. When you admit that path is gone, you're not saying nothing good is possible. You're saying, if something good is possible, it won't be a replica of that. That distinction is everything. As long as you're secretly trying to recreate a lost past, you'll walk past real, present opportunities that don't look like what you imagined. Once you stop fighting the past, you can finally interrogate it. Take one missed opportunity that haunts you and strip away its labels. What precisely did it represent? Autonomy? Creativity? Adventure? Recognition? Intimacy? Status? Learning? Maybe that business you never started wasn't just about money. It was about having something that was yours. Maybe that move abroad wasn't about the city. It was about feeling anonymous and free. Maybe that person you didn't commit to wasn't about romance. It was about being seen in a way you haven't felt since. Under every specific regret lives an abstract need. The shift is moving your focus from the specific form, that company, that city, that person, to the underlying quality, ownership, exploration, being fully seen. Forms expire. Qualities are portable. You can still build a life rich in ownership, exploration, and being seen, even if it can't happen in the original containers you fantasized about. From there, purpose stops being a single, had a narrow job title or life script and becomes a direction made of those underlying qualities. Suppose your deepest regret is not studying what you loved because you went practical. You can't rewind and be that 19-year-old again. But you can ask, what was I trying to protect back then? What am I trying to protect now? And what would it look like to let that love back in at this age on my terms? Maybe that means night classes, a side project, teaching others, volunteering, or weaving that field into your current role. If the regret is about relationships, people you hurt or abandoned, people you never opened up to, you can't force those same doors to reopen. But you can ask, what kind of person was I trying to be around them that I'm not allowing myself to be now? And bring that way of being into the relationships that are actually available. A crucial part of this shift is updating your definition of big enough purpose. Your younger self probably equated purpose with scale. Big job, big audience, big impact. So when those big, clear ladders disappear, it feels like meaning itself dissolved. Midlife invites a quieter definition, purpose as alignment, not spectacle. It's less, will the world notice this? And more, does this feel like a true use of my remaining time, energy, and gifts? Some of the most purposeful things you do in this phase will never look impressive on a resume. Being deeply present with one aging parent, mentoring one younger person in your field, starting one small but honest creative practice, repairing one relationship you once wrote off, learning one new craft for its own sake. These don't erase the past. They change the texture of your present so that 10 years from now, you're not adding today to the stack of I abandoned myself again. The practical side of finding new purpose is less about reinventing everything and more about a series of deliberate experiments. Think of yourself as running pilots instead of committing to a total rebrand overnight. You can drive new identities in small doses, volunteer in a space that represents what you regret not pursuing, take a course in something you always said you were too old to start, spend one evening a week acting as the person you wish you'd been more of, bolder, more honest, more playful, and see what happens. The goal of an experiment is not to succeed, it's to generate data. Some things will feel dead on arrival. Some will wake up parts of you thought were gone. Each data point answers the question, what belongs in the second half of my life and what doesn't? At the same time, you need to renegotiate your relationship with comparison. Regret thrives on looking sideways. You see people your age or younger who did chase the thing you didn't, and your brain writes a simple story. They won, you lost. But you don't see their full cost, their quiet grief, the opportunities they themselves mourn. The only fair comparison is between you and the version of you who keeps replaying the past versus the version of you who uses the past as material. The first stays in the museum of what if. The second walks out with a notebook. When you catch yourself stalking alternate versions of your life through other people, thinking, that could have been me, you can ask, what is it about their life that hits a nerve? Is it freedom, depth, community, creation? Then ask, more usefully, what is one small, unglamorous way I could increase that quality in my current life within the next 3 months? Another necessary shift is moving from self-prosecution to self-compatibility. Regret loves courtroom language. I should have known better. I wasted my life. I ruined everything. But you made those choices with the tools, fears, and information you had then. You might look back and see cowardice where there was actually trauma. You may see laziness where there was untreated depression. You may see selfishness where there was a panicked attempt to survive. This isn't about excusing everything. It's about finally putting your past self in context. When you can say, I understand why I did that, and I'm still responsible for what I do now, you loosen the chains enough to move. Self-hatred locks you to the floor. Self-respect says, I'm not proud of every chapter, but I'm willing to write this one differently. This shift also changes how you think about time. The story of too late assumes a single peak window for meaningful action, usually youth, and everything after that is just managing decline. But purpose is less like a career ladder and more like a language you get more fluent in as you live. Each regret, each loss, each closed door adds vocabulary. You know more now about what empties you, what sustains you, what kinds of compromises break something essential in you. Younger you had energy and optionality. Older you has pattern recognition. That pattern recognition is an asset you could not have had earlier. When you look at your remaining time through that lens, what do I want to practice being fluent in before I die? You stop obsessing over how many pages are left and focus more on what those pages are filled with. Finding new purpose when old opportunities slip away also means widening your idea of opportunity itself. Not every meaningful move will arrive with a label, a contract, or a guaranteed path. Some will show up as inconveniences, invitations, or even crises. A layoff that feels like a brutal loss of status might also be the only thing strong enough to dislodge you from a job that never fit. An illness that strips away your old pace might force you to finally live in a body you've ignored for decades. An empty nest might expose how much of your identity was outsourced to other people's needs and free up attention you can now point at neglected parts of yourself. This doesn't mean everything happens for a reason in a neat, comforting way. It means you have the option, when something breaks, to ask not just why me, but also, now that this has happened, what do I want to make more true in my life than before? You don't have to answer that question with a grand mission statement. Purpose at this stage can start as something as small as a sentence. I want more of this and less of that. More truth, less pretending. More slowness, less frantic proving. More making, less scrolling. More mentoring, less competing. Once that sentence exists, you use it as a filter. When a new request, job, relationship, or habit opportunity appears, you don't ask, will this fix my whole life? You ask, does this bring me closer to or further from that sentence? Over time, 100 small yeses and nos accumulate into a different direction. From the outside, it might look unspectacular. From the inside, it feels like oxygen. Finally, there's a deeper, almost uncomfortable form of purpose that midlife regret can open. Contribution. Not in the abstract, save the world sense, but in the quiet, specific sense of, what do I know because of what I've lived and lost that could spare someone else some confusion? The thing you regret most may be the very place you are most qualified to help others navigate. You don't have to turn it into a brand or a career. It might be as simple as being radically honest in one friendship, parenting differently than you were parented, or offering real talk to someone younger at work about the cost of certain trade-offs. When your pain stops being only about you and starts being material you use to make life a fraction clearer for someone else, it changes its weight. It doesn't vanish. But it becomes less of a private punishment and more of a hard-won resource. Finding new purpose when old opportunities slip away is not about finding a replacement dream that's as shiny as the one you lost. It's about switching from a life that was mostly reactive, chasing what you were told to want, or running from what you feared, to a life that is increasingly chosen. Your regrets become part of your intelligence. Your limits become part of your design. And your remaining years, however many there are, stop being a long epilogue to a story that should have gone differently and start being a new chapter that could only be written by the person who walked through everything you already have. Midlife isn't a second audition for the life you already lost. It's the first real chance to decide what you want to do with the life you actually have. For years, you did what was in front of you. The sensible degree, the stable job, the relationship that made sense on paper, the version of you that other people could easily explain. Some of that was necessary. Some of it was fear. Only now, when certain doors are no longer an option, do you finally see how much of your story was written around avoiding disappointment, conflict, or disapproval. That realization is painful. But it's also the point where the second half of life really starts. Not when everything is still possible, but when enough is no longer possible that you're forced to become selective, honest, and deliberate. You cannot go back and become the person you would have been if you'd chosen differently at 23 or 30 or even 40. That version of you doesn't exist anywhere except in your imagination. What does exist is the person who has actually lived your life. The one who knows what certain compromises cost, what certain ambitions feel like from the inside, what kinds of victories leave you strangely empty, and what small, almost embarrassing desires have never fully shut up. When old opportunities slip away, the instinct is to treat that knowledge as a weapon, proof that you wasted your chance. The alternative is to treat it as a curriculum. You didn't just lose time. You collected evidence. You found out which dreams belonged to you and which were inherited. You discovered which parts of you you're no longer willing to abandon. New purpose is not about erasing that history. It's about finally letting it count. From here, the question stops being, what could I have done back then? And becomes, given everything I know now, what feels worth doing with what's left? That question is smaller and harsher than the ones you asked in your 20s, but it's also more powerful because it forces you to build on rock instead of on fantasy. Maybe that means creating something that will never be impressive on a CV, but feels deeply right in your bones. Maybe it means changing careers at an age when people quietly think you're supposed to coast. Maybe it means staying where you are, but living there differently, with clearer boundaries, truer priorities, less pretending. Whatever it is, it will not feel like a perfect replacement for what you lost. It will feel like an answer to who you are now. In the end, the point is not to die with zero regret. That's impossible for anyone who has actually lived. The point is to stop letting old regret decide that the rest of your life is already spoken for. You are allowed to grieve the doors that are closed and still walk through the ones that are open. You are allowed to say, I would choose differently if I could, and still choose bravely today. The first half of life gave you an ego, a role, a story to try on. The second half invites you to put down what was never really yours and carry, on purpose, what is. Not the life you were promised, not the life you were pressured into. The life that, if you are honest, you would be quietly proud to have inhabited when it's finally over.